The cry for help. The vast expanse of space shimmered with endless stars, but for the Kelran people, those stars brought no comfort. For centuries, the Kelrans had thrived in peace, their advanced civilization mastering science, art, and diplomacy. They had always believed that their intelligence and harmony would protect them from harm. But now, their world was crumbling. The Kelran homeworld, Turixis, was under siege. A ruthless warlord known as Zerath, the Ravager, had descended upon their system with an unstoppable armada. Zerath's forces were brutal, destroying entire cities and enslaving entire populations. The Kelrans, who had no standing army and no experience with war, were defenseless. Their technology, though advanced, had been focused on exploration and healing, not destruction. High Chancellor Elias stood in the great hall of the Kelran Council, his face pale with despair. Around him, the other council members debated furiously, their usually calm voices filled with fear. "We must send another distress signal," one counselor pleaded. "Surely, some advanced species will come to our aid." "We've already tried," another snapped. "The Praesens ignored us. The Exarans refused to interfere. No one wants to challenge Zerath." The room fell silent. The truth was unbearable. They were alone, or so it seemed. Elias cleared his throat, his voice trembling but firm. "There is one species we have not yet contacted." The counselors turned to him, confused. "Who?" Elias hesitated. "Humans." Gasps filled the chamber. Humans were the stuff of legends in the galactic community. Stories of their fierce nature and survival instincts were whispered among alien species. They lived on Earth, a planet classified as a death world, a place so harsh and dangerous that most species considered it uninhabitable. Yet, humans had not only survived there, they had thrived. "Humans," one counselor said, his tone incredulous. "They are savages. They fight among themselves, destroy their own ecosystems, and refuse to join the galactic community." And yet, Elias countered, "They are survivors. If anyone can stand against Zerath, it might be them." The council erupted into argument. Some were terrified of what humans might do if they were brought to Turixis. Others argued that they had no choice. In the end, desperation won. A decision was made to send the signal. Far away, on the small blue planet called Earth, a strange message reached the United Earth Coalition's Deep Space Monitoring Station. At first, the technicians thought it was another routine anomaly. But as the signal was decrypted, its contents stunned them. "This is a message of desperation from the Kelran people of Turixis. We are under attack by the warlord Zerath. Our civilization faces annihilation. We beg for assistance. Please, if you value life, help us." The message sparked a heated debate among Earth's leaders. Humanity had only recently unified under the United Earth Coalition, and resources were still stretched thin. Many argued that Earth had no business involving itself in alien conflicts. But one voice stood out. Commander Elias Drake, a decorated officer and a staunch believer in humanity's potential, addressed the council. His words were clear and powerful. "For centuries, we humans have been seen as a threat by the galaxy. But we are more than our past. We are fighters, yes, but we fight for what is right. If we ignore this plea, we prove them right. But if we answer, we show them who we truly are." Drake's speech swayed the council. Humanity would answer the call. The Kelrans watched anxiously as the humans' response arrived. When the first human ships appeared in their skies, many Kelrans felt a mix of relief and terror. The ships were unlike anything they had ever seen, rugged, practical, and built for war. When the humans landed, their appearance only heightened the unease. They were taller, broader, and more imposing than the delicate Kelrans. Their eyes burned with intensity, their movements deliberate and efficient. Commander Drake stepped forward, his expression serious but calm. He addressed the gathered Kelrans, his voice steady. "We received your message. We understand the threat you face. We are here to help. But to win this fight, we will need your trust and cooperation." The Kelrans whispered among themselves. Could these fierce beings truly be their saviors? Some clung to hope, while others were consumed by doubt. As the humans began assessing the situation, one thing became clear. The fight against Zerath would be unlike anything either species had ever faced. But for now, one question lingered in the minds of all. Were the humans a blessing or a curse? The answer would change the galaxy forever. Humanity answers the call. The atmosphere inside the United Earth Coalition's war chamber was tense. Holographic projections of the Kelran homeworld hovered in the center, its sprawling cities flickering with damage reports. On the outer rim of the display, red markers indicated the advancing forces of Warlord Zerath. Each day, the markers crept closer to the heart of Terixis. Commander Ilias Drake stood with his arms crossed, eyes narrowing as he analyzed the tactical feed. Around him, admirals, diplomats, and high-ranking officials murmured in quiet debate. Some wore expressions of concern, while others showed no interest at all. To many, this was not humanity's problem. "They're an isolated species," Admiral Thorne spoke, leaning forward with hands pressed against the table. His voice carried a hint of skepticism. "The Kelrans have nothing to offer us in return. Why should we risk our people for theirs?" A few heads nodded. It was a fair point. Earth was still recovering from internal conflicts that had united its nations under one banner. Resources were stretched thin. Space exploration was still in its early stages, and the idea of engaging in a galactic war seemed reckless. Drake took a step forward, his voice cutting through the low chatter. "Because we're not like them." The room quieted. "We don't turn our backs on those who can't defend themselves." Drake continued, eyes scanning the chamber. "For centuries, humanity has fought for survival on Earth, a planet that has tried to kill us every step of the way. We have endured ice ages, plagues, and wars, and every time we came out stronger." His gaze sharpened. Now, an entire civilization is facing extinction, and they turn to us. Not to the Praesens, not to the Exerans. Us. There was silence, save for the hum of the holograms. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others seemed intrigued. Admiral Thorne narrowed his eyes. "Even if we agree to this, what makes you think we can handle Zerath's forces? His fleet outmatches ours 10-1. Drake's expression hardened. "Outmatches? Maybe. Outthinks? Not a chance." The room remained still as Drake stepped closer to the holographic display. A flick of his wrist, and the projection shifted, showing Earth's war history. Small but powerful forces outmaneuvering larger armies. Guerrilla warfare shaping the fate of nations. "We've been underestimated before," Drake said, his voice quieter but no less commanding. "And every time, we rewrote the rules of war." A long pause followed, and then, slowly, nods of agreement. The decision was made. Humanity would answer the call. Days later, the first wave of Earth's fleet departed, led by Commander Drake's flagship, the Resolute. As the ships pierced the veil of deep space, Drake watched the swirling cosmos from the bridge, his hands resting on the rail. The journey to Terixis was long, and doubt still lingered in the minds of his crew. Lieutenant Caravale approached, her expression curious. "Sir, can I ask something?" Drake nodded without turning his gaze from the viewport. "Why us?" she asked quietly. Why didn't the Kelrans ask for help from the bigger players in the galactic community? Why risk asking Deathworlders? Drake smirked faintly. Because the others are afraid of Zerath. They think it's safer to let him destroy the weak and stay out of his way. But the Kelrans know one thing the others don't. What's that? That we don't run, Drake said simply. When Earth's fleet finally arrived over Terixis, the Kelrans gathered in the millions to witness it. Their sleek silver towers, though damaged, still stood tall against the sky. From the observation platforms, Kelran leaders and citizens watched in silence as human warships descended, their dark, jagged hulls painting a stark contrast to the smooth lines of Kelran architecture. As Drake stepped onto Kelran soil, High Chancellor Elias greeted him personally. The Kelran leader's pale blue eyes flickered with both gratitude and fear. "You came," Elias said, clasping his hands nervously. "I must admit, part of me wasn't sure if you would." Drake glanced at the damaged city behind Elias, the faint hum of Earth's war machinery echoing in the background as human troops disembarked. "We don't make promises lightly, Chancellor. Where's the enemy?" Elias gestured toward the horizon, where faint plumes of smoke rose. "Zarath's forces will return within days. We barely held them off last time." Drake's gaze sharpened. "You didn't hold them off, Chancellor. You survived." "There's a difference." Elias looked down in shame, but Drake's tone softened. "Don't worry. That's what we're here for." As the hours passed, human soldiers and Kelran engineers worked together to fortify the city. The Kelrans marveled at the efficiency of human combat drones and defense systems, but it was the soldiers themselves who left the strongest impression. "These humans," one Kelran scientist whispered as he observed a squad assembling heavy rail cannons. "They look so dangerous." "They are," Elias replied quietly. "But so is Zarath. And that's exactly what we need." By nightfall, the city's perimeter had transformed into a fortress. Human soldiers patrolled the streets, their advanced weaponry glinting under the pale light of Turix's twin moons. Yet even as preparations were made, Zarath's spies watched from the shadows. The warlord had learned of the Deathworlders' arrival, and he was not pleased. First contact. The Kelran sky shimmered with the first light of dawn as the human fleet loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the battered capital of Turixis. To the Kelrans below, the sight was awe-inspiring and terrifying. On the ground, hundreds of Kelrans gathered, gazing up at the descending ships. Their designs were foreign and crude compared to the elegant vessels the Kelrans crafted for exploration, but there was something undeniable about them. These ships were built for one purpose: war. As the massive landing craft touched down, a deep hum resonated through the air. Steam hissed from the hydraulic ramps, and out marched the first units of Earth's expeditionary forces. Clad in armored exosuits, their visors glowed faintly in the dim light. The contrast between the two species was stark. The Kelrans, lithe and graceful, wore thin robes of shimmering material, their bodies naturally fragile. The humans, taller and broader, moved with the weight of soldiers used to carrying the burdens of survival. At the forefront, Commander Elias Drake led the procession. His steel-gray eyes swept over the gathered Kelrans, reading their expressions: fear, curiosity, doubt. He had seen those looks before. To them, humanity was a last resort, a necessary evil. High Chancellor Elias stepped forward, his pale blue skin almost translucent in the light. He bowed, placing his hands together in the traditional Kelran greeting. "Welcome, Commander Drake. On behalf of my people, we thank you for answering our call." Drake returned a nod. "We don't ignore distress signals, Chancellor. Show us what we're dealing with." Elias motioned for Drake to follow, leading him through the streets. Behind them, human soldiers spread out, their disciplined march echoing through the city's stone avenues. Kelrans peered from windows and balconies, whispering to one another in hushed voices. "They're so rigid," one elder murmured. "They feel out of place here," another added. Drake caught fragments of the conversations, but his attention remained fixed ahead. The city was worse than he expected. Buildings had been reduced to rubble, and makeshift shelters crowded the once grand courtyards. It was clear the Kelrans were not built for war. As they reached the city's outer perimeter, Elias paused before a large shield generator, its surface cracked and sparking. Beyond the weakened barrier lay the wastelands, vast stretches of scorched earth, and the skeletal remains of fallen Kelran ships. "This was our last line of defense," Elias admitted. "It held, for a time. Drake knelt beside the generator, examining the damage. His engineers approached, tools in hand, already calculating repair procedures. "This isn't going to hold another assault," Drake said plainly. Elias's shoulders sagged. "We know." Drake straightened. "Then we'll build something that will." For the next several hours, human soldiers worked alongside Kelran engineers, reinforcing defensive positions and deploying automated turrets along the perimeter. Despite their advanced technology, the Kelrans marveled at the simplicity and efficiency of Earth's war machines. Lyra, a young Kelran scientist, watched closely as a human squad calibrated artillery emplacements. She approached one of the soldiers, her curiosity overcoming her fear. "What is this?" she asked, pointing to the sleek, barrel-shaped device being mounted on a platform. The soldier, a man with a scar running down his cheek, smiled faintly. "It's a rail cannon. Packs a punch." Lyra blinked. "It's so crude." He chuckled. "Maybe, but it works." Before Lyra could respond, a distant rumble echoed from beyond the shield. The ground trembled, and alarms blared across the city. Drake's voice cut through the comms. "Positions now. We've got movement on the horizon." Kelran scrambled to evacuate the outer districts as Zarath's forces emerged from the distant haze. Massive assault carriers rolled across the land, flanked by swarms of drone fighters. The sky darkened as the warlord's fleet loomed in low orbit. Elias's hands trembled as he watched the monitors. They came faster than expected. Drake's expression remained calm. "They always do." He activated his comlink, his voice carrying across the entire fleet. "All units, engage defensive protocols. Artillery teams, fire on my mark." The first shots rang out as rail cannons ignited, their magnetic pulses tearing through the air. Zarath's assault carriers shuddered as projectiles pierced their hulls. The battlefield erupted into chaos as human infantry surged forward, meeting the enemy head-on. Kelrans watched in astonishment from behind the shield as the humans fought. Unlike their passive defense strategies, the humans moved aggressively, pushing the battle line forward with unrelenting force. Lyra turned to Elias, her eyes wide. "They're not holding the line. They're breaking it." Elias's gaze remained fixed on the battle. "That's what Deathworlders do." Despite the initial success, Zarath's forces adapted quickly. Drone fighters circled back, targeting key human positions. One by one, turrets exploded in flames. A sudden explosion rocked the command center, causing Elias to stumble. Smoke filled the air as enemy bombardments rained down on the city's outskirts. Drake's voice crackled over the comms. "We're losing ground. We need to fall back to secondary positions." Elias turned to Drake, panic in his eyes. "We can't hold them off forever." Drake's gaze darkened. "We don't need to. We just need to last long enough." As the battle raged on, a cloaked figure watched from the shadows of the Kelran capital. Zarath's spy had infiltrated the city days before, gathering intelligence. Now he whispered into his communicator, sending vital information back to the warlord. By the time the humans realized the betrayal, it would be too late. The first battle. The sky above Tyryxus burned with streaks of light as Zarath's assault fleet descended through the atmosphere. Clouds parted under the weight of his warships, casting enormous shadows over the battered Kelran capital. From the city's outskirts, human and Kelran forces braced for the inevitable clash. Commander Elias Drake stood atop a fortified ridge, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His breath came slow and steady as his soldiers manned rail cannons, energy shields, and heavy turrets along the defensive perimeter. The battlefield stretched far and wide, but Drake had learned long ago that wars weren't won by territory. They were won by resilience. Behind him, High Chancellor Elias paced nervously. The Kelran leader's delicate features betrayed his anxiety. "Are you sure we're ready for this?" Elias asked, voice trembling. Drake didn't look away from the horizon. "We're as ready as we'll ever be." "They outnumber us 3-1. Elias pressed, wringing his hands. Drake's eyes narrowed as he spotted the first wave of Zarath's war machines approaching, a battalion of massive assault carriers, their armored treads grinding over the scorched earth. Swarms of drone fighters buzzed overhead like mechanical wasps, and behind them arched infantry columns of heavily armed mercenaries, their armor reflecting the blood-red hue of Zarath's insignia. "We're used to being outnumbered," Drake said calmly. "Let's see if they're ready for us." The first shots echoed across the wasteland. Human artillery roared to life, sending electromagnetic slugs ripping through the enemy's front line. Rail cannons fired in rapid succession, tearing into the advancing assault carriers. Explosions lit up the battlefield, and the mercenaries scattered under the relentless bombardment. The Kelrans watched from behind the shield barrier, their eyes wide with disbelief. The humans weren't retreating. They were advancing. "They're pushing forward." Lyra, the young Kelran engineer, gasped. "That's not a defense strategy," Ilias muttered. "It's an offensive one." Drake's voice crackled over the comms. "Forward units, keep the pressure on. Don't let them regroup." Human soldiers moved swiftly across the terrain, firing plasma rifles and launching grenades into the enemy's ranks. The sound of battle became deafening, but the humans pressed forward, relentless in their assault. As the fight intensified, Zarath's forces adapted. The drones shifted tactics, circling behind the human artillery line. Within moments, automated turrets exploded under precise bombardment, and Zarath's infantry surged through the weakened flanks. "Commander," Elias's voice broke through the comms. "They're breaking through on the west perimeter." Drake's expression hardened. "Pull back Squad Delta and redirect fire to Sector 3. We can't let them breach the city." But even as orders were issued, a deafening explosion shook the battlefield. A section of the Kelran energy shield flickered and collapsed under concentrated fire. Zarath's forces poured through the gap, overwhelming the outer defenses. Ilias gripped the railing, his knuckles turning white. "They're inside the city." Drake's voice remained calm but sharp. "Not for long." The streets of Tyryxus became a war zone as human soldiers engaged the invading forces in close-quarters combat. Plasma bolts ricocheted off stone walls, and buildings crumbled under heavy fire. Human strike teams moved quickly, securing choke points and driving the enemy back, but casualties mounted with each skirmish. In the heart of the chaos, Drake led a squad personally, his rifle glowing hot from continuous fire. "Clear this sector," he barked, stepping over the bodies of fallen mercenaries. A sudden roar filled the air as one of Zarath's assault mechs crashed through a market square, its mechanical limbs crushing debris beneath its weight. Its cannons locked onto Drake's position. "Scatter," Drake shouted, diving behind cover as the mech unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. Lyra, who had been working to repair the damaged shield relays nearby, watched in horror. She turned to Ilias, her voice desperate. "We need to do something. They can't hold them off alone." Ilias hesitated, fear gripping his heart. But then he saw the humans, outnumbered, outgunned, yet fighting with everything they had. With a deep breath, Ilias activated the city's emergency comms, his voice echoing across Tyryxus. "Kelrans of Tyryxus, the time to stand idle has passed. We must fight for our home. Assist the humans. Together, we can drive them back." The message resonated deeply. Kelran civilians, engineers and scholars emerged from their shelters, wielding makeshift weapons and joining the fray alongside human forces. Drake caught sight of the Kelrans flooding the streets, using repurposed mining lasers and construction drones to hold off the mercenaries. For the first time, a faint smile tugged at his lips. "They're tougher than they look," he muttered. Lyra sprinted to Drake's side, breathing heavily. "We've rerouted power to the shield generators, but it won't last long. We need to destroy the command carrier directing their forces." Drake nodded, reloading his rifle. "Then let's finish this." As the battle raged on, Drake's strike team, supported by Lyra and a squad of Kelran engineers, infiltrated the command carrier stationed outside the city. Explosions rocked the hull as the humans planted charges along critical points. Zarath's commanders panicked, issuing retreat orders to their ground forces as the ship's systems began to fail. Minutes later, the carrier erupted in a massive fireball, visible from every corner of Turixis. The remaining mercenaries scattered, their will to fight broken. As dawn crept over the war-torn city, the battlefield fell silent. Human and Kelran soldiers stood side by side, gazing at the smoldering remains of Zarath's fleet. Alias approached Drake, his eyes reflecting both exhaustion and gratitude. "You saved us." Drake shook his head. "You saved yourselves. We just gave you the push you needed." Lyra stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. "Thank you for everything." Drake glanced at his soldiers, their armor scorched but spirits unbroken. "The war's not over," he said quietly. "But this was a good start." Unity and betrayal. The smoke from the battlefield had barely settled when the Kelrans began to rebuild. Streets once filled with the echoes of war now bustled with the sounds of reconstruction. Human engineers worked alongside Kelran architects, reinforcing defenses and restoring damaged infrastructure. Despite the losses, there was hope, a fragile hope that Turixis might finally endure. Commander Ilias Drake stood atop the city's central watchtower, gazing at the horizon, where Zarath's forces had retreated. His arms were crossed, and though the battle had been won, his expression remained grim. Beside him, Lyra tightened a loose wire on her wrist-mounted console, her hands stained with grease from long hours of repair work. "You still think they'll come back?" she said, not looking up. Drake's eyes narrowed. "Warlords don't run forever. Zarath's regrouping. It's just a matter of when." Lyra exhaled slowly. "Then why stay? You've done enough." "Because you're not ready," Drake replied without hesitation. "And I don't leave allies to fend for themselves." The word allies hung in the air, and for a moment, Lyra almost smiled. In the heart of the city, a large hall served as the new command center. Holographic displays flickered with tactical maps, supply routes, and ongoing patrols. Kelran and human leaders met regularly now, their collaboration growing stronger. High Chancellor Ilias presided over the meetings, his confidence returning with each successful operation. But not everyone shared Elias's optimism. In the shadows of the council chambers, whispers spread, doubts about the humans' intentions. Some Kelrans, though grateful, feared the growing presence of Deathworlders in their society. Rumors circulated that humanity's warlike nature could one day turn against them. One voice, in particular, fanned those flames. Councillor Kalen, a staunch isolationist. "We rely too heavily on the humans," Kalen warned during a heated council meeting. "Every fortification they build, every weapon they install, what happens if they decide to stay indefinitely? We open our doors now, but what if they refuse to leave?" Ilias frowned. "Commander Drake and his forces saved this city. We owe them our survival." Kalen leaned forward, his tone sharp. "We owe them nothing but caution. They came because it suited their interest. Do you think they would have sacrificed their own for mere goodwill?" The room fell silent. Later that evening, Kalen met with a cloaked figure in the alleyways behind the council chambers. The figure's voice was low, distorted by a mechanical device. "You've done well to sow out, Counselor," the figure said. "Continue undermining their trust in the humans." Kalen hesitated. "I agreed to question their influence, not betray my own people." The figure stepped closer, revealing a glimpse of crimson armor beneath the cloak. Zarath's insignia glinted faintly in the moonlight. "You misunderstand, Counselor. You're ensuring your people's survival. Zarath does not want to destroy Turixis, only to ensure it knows its place. Humanity's involvement is a disruption that cannot be tolerated." Kalen's mouth went dry. "What do you want me to do?" "Lower the southern perimeter shield at dawn. Just briefly. A mere malfunction. Zarath's scouts will handle the rest." Kalen's hands trembled, but he nodded. At sunrise, alarms blared across Turixis. A breach had occurred in the southern district, allowing Zarath's forces to slip through undetected. By the time the defense network responded, several key supply depots had been sabotaged. Drake and his strike team arrived at the scene minutes later, rifles raised as smoke poured from the crumbling structures. Human soldiers secured the area, but the damage had been done. Internal sabotage, Drake growled, inspecting the breach. This wasn't random. Lyra, standing nearby, scanned the security logs. Her eyes widened. The shields were deactivated for 72 seconds, manually. Drake's gaze darkened. Who had clearance for that? Lyra hesitated, then quietly answered, Counselor Callan. The confrontation in the council chamber was swift. Drake, flanked by 2 armed soldiers, entered as Callan was addressing the room. You have something you want to explain. Drake's voice was cold, cutting through the proceedings. Callan's eyes flickered with panic but quickly shifted to defiance. You accuse me based on speculation. The security logs don't speculate, Drake replied, tossing a datapad onto the table. You lowered the shield, and Zarath's forces waltzed right through. Your malfunction almost cost lives. Callan clenched his fists. I did what I thought was necessary. We can't let humans control our fate. Alias rose from his seat, anger flashing in his normally calm eyes. You let fear guide you to betrayal. Callan's voice grew louder, desperate. You think they're heroes. They're soldiers, warriors who know nothing but destruction. We will become like them if we let them stay. Drake stepped forward, his eyes locked on Callan's. You don't understand us at all. We don't fight because we crave war. We fight because we know what happens to those who stand by and do nothing. Callan's defiance crumbled under the weight of Drake's words. Guards led him away, and silence lingered after his departure. Alias turned to Drake, lowering his head in apology. I regret that this happened. He does not speak for all of us. Drake gave a faint nod. I know, but Zarath's still out there, and next time, he won't use politics. He'll come with everything he has. Lyra crossed her arms, a flicker of determination in her eyes. Then we'll be ready. Drake glanced at her, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Yes, we will. The turning point. The atmosphere in Terixis grew heavier in the days following Counselor Callan's betrayal. Although he had been imprisoned, the cracks in unity lingered. Some Kelrins whispered that perhaps Callan wasn't wrong. Maybe humanity's strength came with a cost. But while doubt festered in some corners, in others, it sparked something far more dangerous. Commander Elias Drake stood at the edge of the southern perimeter, gazing at the scorched land where Zarath's forces had breached the city days before. Despite the repairs, Drake felt the warlord's presence like a shadow stretching across the planet. Zarath wasn't finished. Not yet. Lyra approached from behind, her voice soft but firm. You haven't slept, have you? Drake smirked faintly, his eyes not leaving the horizon. Sleep doesn't win wars. Lyra crossed her arms, her gaze shifting to the distant mountains where Zarath's forces had last been spotted. Neither does burning yourself out. We need you at your best. For a moment, Drake said nothing. Then, after a long pause, he finally spoke. We're at a tipping point, Lyra. Zarath knows Terixis won't survive another full-scale attack, and we're not ready to launch an offensive. He's waiting for us to weaken. Then he'll finish what he started. Lyra frowned. Then we strike first. Drake turned, raising an eyebrow. You sound like one of us. Maybe I've been spending too much time around humans, she replied with a small smile. Before Drake could respond, a comm officer's voice crackled through his earpiece. Commander, you need to see this. We've intercepted an encrypted transmission from Zarath's fleet. Drake's eyes narrowed. Patch it through to the war room. I'm on my way. The war room buzzed with tension. Holographic displays flickered, showing the intercepted signal, jumbled, fragmented, but unmistakably from one of Zarath's forward scout ships. Drake and Elias stood side by side as the audio feed stabilized. A gravelly voice echoed through the chamber. Position confirmed. Mobilization imminent. Command ship targeting orbital entry. Estimate, 72 hours. Lyra's eyes widened as she processed the transmission. They're preparing for a final assault. Elias's face paled. 3 days. That's not enough time to reinforce our defenses. Drake's jaw tightened. That's because we're not going to defend. The room fell silent. Elias slowly turned to face him. What do you mean? Drake's gaze burned with intensity. We're taking the fight to Zerath. His fleet's still gathering in orbit, which means he's vulnerable. If we wait, we'll lose Turixis. If we hit him now, we might just end this war before it starts. Elias hesitated, visibly conflicted. Commander, our people aren't warriors. Even with your forces, this is a dangerous gamble. Drake stepped forward, placing a hand on Elias's shoulder. You don't have to fight like us, but you need to believe this fight can be won. Lyra nodded, her voice filled with quiet resolve. I can retrofit our orbital drones to disrupt their communications. If we blind their fleet, your ships can slip through undetected. Elias studied them for a long moment. And then, finally, he relented with a nod. Do what must be done. 30 hours later, the human fleet, small but deadly, hovered at the edge of Turixis' atmosphere. The sleek black hulls of Earth's warships reflected the faint light of the twin moons, while Kelran drones flitted between them, scanning for enemy patrols. On the bridge of the Resolute, Drake stood before the command console, watching as Lyra fine-tuned the last of the drone disruptors. Drones are ready, Lyra confirmed. Once we launch, they'll scramble Zerath's comms for approximately 30 minutes. After that, we're exposed. Drake nodded. 30 minutes is more than enough. Elias's voice chimed in over the comms. The Kelran fleet will remain in low orbit to defend the capital. Good luck, Commander. Drake smiled faintly. We make our own luck. As the human fleet surged forward, the Kelran drones dispersed, emitting powerful electromagnetic pulses that rippled across the void. Zarath's warships, stationed in high orbit, flickered with disrupted signals. By the time Zerath's forces realized what was happening, the Resolute and its escorts had already slipped through their defensive line. Inside Zerath's command ship, alarms blared as the warlord paced before his throne of iron. A scout stumbled into the room, breathing heavily. Warlord, the humans. They've breached the perimeter. Zerath's eyes narrowed into slits, his grip tightening around the hilt of his blade. Fools, he growled. Let them come. I will crush them myself. The final battle erupted in the heart of Zerath's fleet. Human and Kelran strike teams boarded the command ship, engaging in brutal close-quarters combat. Plasma fire lit the dark corridors, and explosions rattled the warlord's throne room as Drake's strike team approached. Zerath met them head-on, his towering figure clad in crimson battle armor. I should thank you, Deathworlder, Zerath sneered as he raised his massive war axe. You saved me the trouble of hunting you down. Drake stepped forward, his rifle aimed steadily at the warlord's chest. You talk too much. The two clashed with a fury that shook the command ship to its core. Lyra, meanwhile, fought to override the ship's systems, planting explosive charges in critical areas. In the end, it wasn't strength that defeated Zerath. It was precision. As Drake's blade found its mark, Lyra detonated the charges, crippling the warlord's flagship. The battle was over. As the human fleet returned to Turixis, the people of the city gathered to watch the ships descend. Elias met Drake at the landing bay, bowing deeply. Turixis owes you more than words can express, Elias said. Drake shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me this. You'll never let fear guide you again. Elias smiled softly. We won't. Lyra stepped beside Drake, watching the stars. So, what happens now? Drake gazed at the horizon, the weight of war still lingering. Now, we rebuild. Together. Victory through sacrifice. The The stars above Tyryxus shone brighter than ever, their light piercing the darkness that had loomed for so long. Zarath was dead. His flagship lay in smoldering ruins above the atmosphere, drifting as a silent reminder of the warlord's reign and his fall. Across the city, cheers echoed from the streets as news of humanity's victory spread like wildfire. The battle was over. But for Commander Elias Drake, the end of the war felt more like the beginning of something far more complicated. From the balcony of the Kelrin High Tower, Drake overlooked the bustling city below. Human and Kelrin soldiers worked side by side, clearing debris and dismantling Zarath's remaining siege engines. Reconstruction efforts were already underway, but Drake knew the scars left by war didn't heal overnight. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the remnants of Zarath's fleet still flickered faintly in low orbit. "It feels strange," she said quietly. Drake raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" "That it's over." Lyra hesitated, searching for the right words. Zarath was a monster, but he wasn't the first threat we faced. And he won't be the last. Drake nodded, his expression hardening. "No, he won't. But that's the nature of survival. There's always someone else waiting to take power." Lyra looked at him, curiosity in her eyes. "Is that how humans see the galaxy? One endless fight after another?" Drake turned to her, his eyes calm but firm. "Humans don't fight because we love war. We fight because we understand what happens when no one else will." Later that evening, a ceremony was held in the heart of Tyryxus. The Grand Hall, once a place of quiet diplomacy, now thrummed with life. Kelrins filled the chamber, their robes adorned with symbols of resilience and unity. Human soldiers lined the walls, their battle-worn armor polished but scarred, each mark a testament to their sacrifice. High Chancellor Elias stepped forward, raising his hands to quiet the murmurs. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of a man who had witnessed his people's near destruction and their salvation. "Today, we stand together not as two species divided by fear, but as one united by courage." Elias's eyes swept over the room, lingering on Drake and his soldiers. "Commander Drake, on behalf of the Kelrin people, I offer our eternal gratitude. You stood with us when no one else would. Tyryxus lives because of you." The hall erupted in applause, but Drake's attention drifted to the back of the chamber, where a row of flags stood, each one bearing the insignia of fallen soldiers, both human and Kelrin. Lyra noticed his silence. "You don't seem to be in the mood for celebration." Drake's gaze didn't waver. Victory comes at a price. As the crowd dispersed, Elias approached Drake, his expression thoughtful. "Commander, I wanted to speak with you privately." Drake crossed his arms. "Something on your mind, Chancellor?" Elias hesitated. "I want to offer humanity something more permanent. A formal alliance. Our people have much to learn from one another, and with Zarath gone, the galaxy will take notice of Tyryxus. I fear this victory may make us a target." Drake studied Elias carefully. An alliance would mean standing by each other if another warlord comes knocking. That's not a small ask. Elias smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but I believe it's a small price for lasting peace." Drake nodded slowly. "I'll take your offer to the coalition. But I'll warn you now, humans don't make alliances lightly. When we commit fully." "That's exactly why I'm asking," Elias replied. 1 week later, Tyryxus' skyline shimmered under the light of repaired defense shields. Humanity's fleet remained stationed in orbit, but preparations were already underway for their departure. Drake stood by the loading ramp of the Resolute, watching as human soldiers packed equipment into the ship's cargo holds. Lyra approached, her expression softer than usual. "Leaving so soon?" Drake glanced at her. "Your defenses are back online, and Zarath's forces are in full retreat. Our job here is done." Lyra shifted her weight, struggling to find the right words. "It feels wrong, somehow. Like we're losing something by letting you leave." Drake offered a rare smile. You're not losing anything. If anything, you've gained allies. If you ever need us again, you know where to find us. Lyra lowered her voice, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. What if we need you before then? Drake met her gaze, his tone steady but warm. You won't. As the final supplies were loaded, Drake stepped up the ramp, pausing halfway. Take care of this world, Lyra. It's stronger than you think. Lyra watched as the Resolute lifted off, disappearing into the vastness of the stars. From the observation deck of the high tower, Elias stood with Lyra as the human fleet vanished into the night sky. The Chancellor folded his hands behind his back. He's right, you know. We've come further than we ever thought possible. Lyra smiled softly, her gaze never leaving the horizon. I know, but part of me wonders, how long until the next warlord appears? Elias sighed, his eyes filled with the weight of leadership. When that day comes, we'll be ready. Because this time, we won't stand alone. As Teryx's twin moons rose over the rebuilt city, the stars above seemed just a little closer, and far less lonely.